Hello, my name is Arthur Joura. I'm the Bonsai Curator at the North Carolina Arboretum. That's where we are today. Thank you for joining us. We have a good project ahead. We're going to put together a tray landscape. Those of you who are familiar with the Arboretum's collection probably know that one of its distinctive qualities is that we have quite a few tray landscapes, more than you would typically see in a public collection. And part of the reason for that is that the general public really responds well to them. They enjoy seeing the little landscapes. And another reason we have a lot of them is I enjoy making them. So that's a good combination. I like to make them, people like to look at them. So I'm going to show you how, and we're going to keep this pretty simple. Okay, instead of going into a bonsai pot, today we'll be using a slab. This piece of stone is quite thin. It was a nice find. You know, I have my eyes out for this sort of thing anytime I'm in a place where I might come across it. Of course, lugging it back to the vehicle can be a challenge. We have some other rocks, right? Varying sizes and shapes. The material is not all uniform, but it's okay. It's interesting, and rocks kind of go together in a general sense anyway. We also have, as our main subject plant, this American hornbeam. And this plant was grown from a seed, and the seed first sprang up in 2009. Okay? So it's taken a while to get here, but it's spent its whole life growing in a container. And it's been pruned on every step of the way. If you look at it and you see that very angular nature of the branching, that's from cutting, growing, cutting, growing. And that's probably all the training this will receive is cutting and growing. No wire on this because it has smooth bark and that can be very easily damaged. We have a couple of secondary plants. This is a dwarf azalea. Okay, this is an Asian variety of azalea. I'm not sure which one. We have quite a few plants kicking around in the nursery, and they're there so that when I go out looking for something to use in a demonstration like this, I've got an assortment to choose from. So this is a little azalea. It's loaded with buds. You'll notice it's being grown to look like a shrub, and that's just what we want. And we're not going to try to make a tree out of this. We just want it to look like a shrub. You can think of rhododendron if you're familiar with the environment around here in western North Carolina. The rhododendrons are a pretty prominent feature of the understory in the forests here. And then this is a little dwarf meadow rue. You can hardly see it. It's just popping up. But it'll make a nice clump, and it also spreads out and it flowers. So it's got a lot of visual interest. Of course, it's seasonal. It'll die down to the ground every year in springtime and then wake up in wintertime rather, and then it will wake up in springtime like you see it doing right now. So those are the things that we're going to fit on this stone slab and try to create a scene. Almost like painting a picture, you know, and it should ring true to people who see it. That's the idea. We want to give an impression of being in the forest around here, not just anywhere, but here in western North Carolina where the Arboretum is. So that's our purpose today. Let's see how it works out. First thing we have to do is provide some walls to contain the planting. This is not a pot, obviously, it's just a slab, a rock slab. Well, we're going to sit the plants on top of here, but they would very quickly dry out unless they're encased somehow in medium. And in order to do that, we need some kind of berm to hold it all in place. So that's the first step, is to establish the berm. And you can think of that as a kind of footprint. It's going to be, it's going to form the contours of the soil mass, or the medium mass. And we use this stuff here, which is generally called muck, and it's long fibered sphagnum moss and peat and water, and then it's all mixed together and kind of kneaded like clay. This is dried a little bit because I've had it a while, so I had to add a little more water to it. And then I start to build the wall that will go all the way around here. This material is very tacky, and so it'll stick to a certain extent. You know, it's not cement, but it has body, and it's tacky, so you can mold it and stick it to things. I'm mostly following the contours of the rock. I said that we'll follow more or less the outline of the rock in making this kind of footprint for the planting. But the one place where we diverge a bit from that is out here at this point. And here we want to let a little bit more of the rock show. And I'll explain why a little bit later on. But that's our basic footprint right here. And I'll have to add some more muck in places, but that gives me the general idea of the space I have in which to plant. Our berm built, and this plant, this tree is going to sit right about here. Well, it looks huge right now, but a lot of that is the pot and all the root and medium in the pot. And we're going to be reducing that. We're also going to reduce the tree, and that'll be the first step, is to do some pruning on this to not only make it a little bit more compact, but also to further define its style. The way this was grown, I didn't really try too hard to steer it in any direction. I just kept cutting it and growing it, cutting it and growing it, to leave myself a lot of options to look at and choose over when it came time to do the work that I'm going to do right now. So I have a really long line right here, and I think it's too long. It's going to get cut back. So I could cut it back right there, and that wouldn't be a bad thing. But I've got these two lines going right here where I'm pointing at, right? One line goes out this way and one line goes out this way. I've shortened this one, but it still feels strong, like maybe too strong. This is the line I would prefer to have be the main line of the tree. That is the continuation of the line that starts down here at the base and goes on up. So I'm going to make this even smaller, but instead of making a pruning cut right here, for example, I'm going to go ahead and leave a stub of that branch. Now I'm taking the pliers and squeezing the bark, crushing it in effect. And what that does is make it very easy to take the bark off. It kind of slips off because it's springtime and it's wet under there. If you let this dry out, then later on when you go to take the bark off, you'll have to carve it off because once it dries, it's really stuck on there. So we do this job now while it's easy. And I don't skin it all the way down to the place where I intend for the live wood to end and the dead wood to begin. Leave it a little ragged and let the plant decide exactly where to draw that line. Then we'll take this tool, which is called a branch splitter, and that's a very descriptive term. I split it a couple of times and then take the pliers and peel down. Oh boy. Oh well. There'll be time for consistency later, after you figure out all the best ways. Consistency is one of those things that seems to get more appealing the older you are. Early on, it just seems like too boring and predictable. Do things the same way all the time. In doing this kind of peeling, one, I'm wanting to give it a ragged edge that looks authentic as being a piece of damage, right? That's how trees in nature lose limbs like that. They get broken off in some violent event like a windstorm. But also, as I'm peeling it down, reducing the overall size of it. And so it becomes a little bit less weighty, okay? Because my main interest was that this line not be too dominant over this one. Well, this is still going to draw a certain amount of attention to itself for the dead wood, which will turn a different color as it ages and not look so green as it does now. So I want the dead wood to be there, but I don't want it to be so eye-catching that, again, it draws your eye away from the line that I want to have be the main line of the trunk. There are some little branches popping out here. Often they come out of the crotches of larger, more established branches, and those almost automatically come off. We don't want every single new branch that the plant produces. It produces a host of them, and then we go through and make decisions about which ones occurred in a place where we can make good use of them. And if they don't, then they'll likely be pruned off. Don't know exactly what the final shape is going to be, so we can't be too aggressive about cutting things off. I'll neaten up some old pruning cuts here too. You know, when I'm cutting them during the growing season, it's just, it's not arbitrary or random, but it's not precise either. And I know that later on I'll need to come in and just clean up things a bit, taking off little dead stubs that don't look good. What I've tried to do over the years is build up a good sense in my own mind, kind of like a visual reference, of what trees look like in nature, how they grow, what shapes their limbs assume. And that's somewhere in my mind as I go about doing this pruning now. I'm thinking about that, or not thinking about it, but just visually remembering it. So when people ask, how do you know what to take off? The honest answer is, well, I don't know. If I were to try to explain it to you, it would come out sounding flippant, you know, like, well, you take off everything that doesn't look right. But the real answer is that having a working knowledge of how trees grow and the shapes that they assume over time and the forces that work on them allows me to shape them that way, shape them in a way that mimics that look. without being overly self-conscious about it. As I mentioned earlier, I really don't want to use any wire on this. I prefer to just do all the shaping of it just like this, going through it limb by limb and making a decision about each one. Should it stay? Should it go? Is it helping or is it distracting? In almost all cases, they get shortened. So I shaped the tree thinking about that natural example that I explained before. But then I have to look at it, step back and look at it in its entirety rather than focusing on limb to limb to limb, to see that it has the right overall look. How do you know the right overall look? Well, you know, that's a subjective call. That comes down to the person doing the looking. I have a pretty good sense of what I'd like to see. And when something doesn't ring true to that mental image, that gives me reason to consider removing it. I feel pretty good about the overall shape of this tree now. It's shaped up pretty nicely. Looks right to me. I'm a little unsure about the length of this one. Maybe this is too long too. I don't know. Maybe I should cut it right here. But I don't know that yet. And so I'm not going to make that decision because I don't have to make it yet. Let's see how the plant looks in its new situation and then evaluate this and see if it's too much. Easy to take it off. But if I take it off and then decide that I wish I hadn't, that's too bad. The next move now is to take it out of the pot. Pull the moss off of it. Oh, we're very good. We're very good about fastening the trees to their pots. Especially after you first repot them, you know, they can fall over pretty easily. So we wire them to the pots. What I'm doing now is removing some of that wire. And now it can come out. That's a pretty nice root ball right there. Not overgrown, but certainly solid, well developed. And it's fashioned in a way to do just what I'm doing with it, right? You stick the hook in the interior, pull out, pulling outward from the center, which is the trunk. Loosen that up. Nice to work on small trees. You can pick them up and turn them upside down. And having loosened up the root ball, as you see, then take our scissors and start whittling it down. It has to be made a little bit, well, actually a lot more shallow, right? Because it's going to sit on that rock. I can't have that big of a root ball sitting on that rock. Because this plant has been container grown its entire life, this isn't the first root pruning it's getting. And you can tell that because the root system is very nice. It's very fine, lots of fine fibrous roots. You see, I've cut the root ball in half and there's no sign anywhere of large roots. They've been all removed in the past by doing this same operation year after year. And so the big roots are gone. The plant produces all these fine fibrous roots, which is exactly what it needs and what we want. You might be watching this and thinking, well, how much root can the plant afford to lose? Obviously, I think it can afford to lose this much. What's that based on? It's based on having done this quite a few times before, and also having a sense of this individual tree. It's a very strong growing specimen. It's a very durable species. American hornbeam is very well suited for bonsai use. And so this strong preconditioned plant should have no problem dealing with this amount of removal. When I come across a larger root, I try to chase it back vigorously, right? We don't want them. And in this case, we have so many nice fibrous roots that we can afford to push hard against the heavier woody roots. Okay, we have our tree prepped. It may be necessary to take a little more off, I don't know, but if so, we can do it. This is a nice, tidy package right now. You know, this is a nicely developed little tree. It has a few years on it. The roots are in great shape. So, I know already that I want this to sit on this end. And the reason is because of the shape of the slab. It's wider at this end and then comes to a point on this end. And so that tells me visually it has movement, eye movement, that goes from the right, as you're looking at it, to the left, right? So this tree also has a sense of movement. And it's eye movement, right? It's not necessarily the shape of the branches, although that lends itself to it, but rather the eye movement when you look at this tree. And I will situate it so that I feel like the eye movement of the tree coordinates with the eye movement of the rock. And that would be something in this area right here. Always we have to keep looking, checking. You know, you have an idea and you go to put it in place, but until you see it actually in the place you imagined it, you can't know for sure if it'll actually work out right that way. But that's where a lot of the enjoyment is in doing this. You know, that's a creative kind of thing where you imagine something and then try to bring it into creation, into fruition. And of course, there's no guarantees that what you imagined will actually be what happens, or that even if you're able to do what you imagined, that it'll actually look good. You can't tell that until you do it and size it up. And so, based on what I'm seeing, I like the position of this. I think this is roughly in the right spot. But what I'm seeing tells me that I ought to go ahead and remove this one that I looked at earlier. Take it down like that. And also that perhaps this is too long up in here. Let me make sure of that. Yeah. I think I'll remove this one piece right here, like that. Good, I think. The next step involves the stones, because I want to deploy this big stone, the largest one I have, in a particular way. You'll notice it's flat here on the bottom, which lends itself to being stood up like that. And I'd like to try to use it that way if I can. And I'd like it to be rather close by the tree. Push the base of the rock down into the muck, help hold it in place. And then check that relationship, right? There's a tree and there's a stone. And they need to look like they belong together. That's the objective, to make it look like that tree has had that stone for a companion since the day it came out of the earth as a little sprout. I feel like I need to move the rock a little bit more this way. I really don't want it interfering with the view of the tree. So I want it to be close, but when somebody looks at the tree from this angle, I don't want them to not be able to see the tree because the rock is right on top of it. So what about when they look at it that way? If I'm going to use the rock next to the tree, there's going to be some view of it where it's in the way. But this is not the way we would present this piece. It'll be presented like this or like this. And either way, I feel this rock is in a good place. I have another stone here, kind of a flat piece, and I'm going to use it over here, forming almost a wall. It's not entirely a wall, right? Because it's only two sides here, but it functions something like that. I'm going to put some more muck down at the base here to make this rock less likely to fall over. Say a word about what great stuff muck is in terms of not just being able to use it this way, but also for plants. Plants seem to love growing in it. So I've got these two in place. I would like to have a third rock in this position here to kind of fill in that gap a little bit. You know, any rock has multiple sides, multiple different ways you can look at it. And so we experiment a bit, try it this way, try it that way, see which look feels best. I like that. I think that's pretty good. Just the relationship, 3 rocks, 1 tree, looking good. A little more muck now to plug up these holes that you see there. Just a thin layer of media underneath the tree. And then I press it down to flatten that, get it as low profile as I can. Then check to make sure that I haven't lost the positioning of the tree. Looking at it from all angles. Well, I like that. I like the way it's shaping up. Okay, we have trees, we have rocks, we have a shrub. The shrub too needs to be trimmed a bit before I can use it. Very easy to deconstruct the root balls of these azaleas because they're very fine rooted. And I didn't even have to use a root hook to break this apart, just shook it out. And much of the medium and some of the roots fell away. So it's all ready to go. It's root pruned and ready without me having to do very much beyond shake it. So now we have our shrub, and you know it doesn't have to be this big. We can make it almost any size. You can take this and just cut it right in half and have two, or cut it into thirds and so on. You could actually break off a pretty small part and use it separately. Let's go ahead and do that, just because we can. So we cut it off like that. And who's left? Just a couple of pieces, but that's fine. I can use a little thing like that here, you know, if I want to, but there it is. This, I want to sit right about there. Right about there. I'm not going to plug it in yet. We'll just let it sit there for right now so I can eyeball it, but also so I can add other elements and make adjustments as necessary. So one of them is this little dwarf meadow rue. Thalictrum is the botanic name. And this is a division, you know, they spread out. And so last year we took one that we had that was a good size and broke it into 3 different parts. And this is one of those parts. And we can take this apart pretty well. Okay. And that's going to sit somewhere here. Not exactly sure yet, but somewhere there. And remember, this doesn't have much presence now, but it'll fill out. It'll look like a lot more than what it looks like right now. And I have to keep that in mind when I place it, because it could get too strong for the area I'm putting it. I still have a few rocks that I'd like to use. And they're going to be placed intermittently around. I put these all together, but these will be separated a bit. But the idea is to try to make it look like, you know, this is a very rocky area. Certainly anybody who walks in the forests around here has seen the beautiful rocks that are everywhere. And they really have a great sense of presence. And you can look at them almost like you look at clouds, you know? When you were a kid, you probably looked at clouds and imagined them being different things based on their shape. You can do the same with stones. And one of the more common stones I see out in the forest is a whale. You see this massive stone sticking out, and it looks just like the head of a whale breaking the surface of the water. So I have some idea of how these things ought to be used, and then we try them out and see how it looks. And if it doesn't look right, then we make an adjustment. I like that arrangement. It feels right to me. The rocks are spaced out, and yet they don't look artificially placed. Not to my eye, anyway. These are performing a kind of function. They make a visual backstop to this end of the arrangement. And they add more visual weight to this end, right? So everything is drawing your eye into this place right here where our main tree sits. And then the tree expresses itself in that motion this way, which draws your eye into the rest of the composition. And that's what you're trying to do, is manipulate the eye of the viewer. You're creating a visual experience. So, having come up with this arrangement and deciding that it looks pretty good to me, and I can live with it, then it's time to go ahead and start planting things, right? They're just sitting there. Let's go ahead and plant them in place. All right, so tree is in place, the shrub is in place, the little accent herbaceous plant is in place, the stones are in place, the berm has been solidified, bulked up where it needed to be, and media has been added. So we're almost to the finish line. The last thing to do is apply moss. The moss is very important, not just for giving it a more finished look, but to cover this berm of muck. And the reason that's important is because if you were to water this now with a garden hose, the force of the water would be enough to wash that muck away. The moss, when it goes on top, will hold the muck in place. And then the whole thing will be one tidy package that just sits on this rock. So that's what we do next, apply the moss. Okay, here we are at the conclusion. Moss has been applied all the way around the berm, plus on any exposed medium that's showing. And it all came together very well. I'm pleased with the look of it. Didn't really encounter any tremendous problems, and that's good. Very nice to have material on hand like this 12-year-old tree that's been trained, for years just for this purpose, or this shrub that just happened to be laying around. An awful lot of success in bonsai generally, but particularly with these little landscapes, is having the right materials on hand. And so I collect them, I think about them and collect them. Stones, little herbaceous plants, just so that they're there when I want to use them. This looks so good to me now that I feel it won't take long before it's showable. Maybe later this year, perhaps for autumn, we might be able to put this out on display. Maybe sooner if things go well, but we have to see how things go first. You'll notice that it looks pretty decent from either side, right? And that's a nice thing to be able to do. Just rotate your plant 180 degrees and get a completely different look at things. Really like the way the big rock played out. So altogether a very pleasing program to do today, and very satisfied with the results. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and I hope you'll come out to the Arboretum soon and see the bonsai, and maybe you'll see this one on display.
How did the art of bonsai come to be so central to the identity of an arboretum in Southern Appalachia? At the North Carolina Arboretum, we consciously root a foreign art in our own place, updating its ancient image to the present day. Subscribe to the Curator's Journal, a year-long online course offering the ultimate insider's view of bonsai at the North Carolina Arboretum by Curator Joura.